What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about the history of the most prolific's not the right word, instrument in the world, and it has been for many, many years. What you see on your screen in the upper left-hand corner is a handwritten score for the Prelude in C from the, as everybody else calls it, the Well-Tempered Clavier. Below that is one of the early printed editions in 1799, and to the right is the more fancy one that was revidiert und mit Fingersatz versehen, which is revised and fingered by Carl Czerny. But first, we got to learn a little bit about the clavier, clavichord, harpsichords, and maybe virginals, the pianoforte, the piano, and maybe the clavinova. But let's start with Johann Sebastian Bach. I like to say Johannes Bach, but it really is Johann Sebastian Bach, because he's the guy that wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier series of 48, count them, 48 preludes and fugues. He was born in 1685, died in 1750. He was a professional organist at age 18. And during his career, he was principally an organist and composer during what was the Baroque period. His best known works, or at least some of them, are the Brandenburg concertos, the Goldberg variations, and remember that he did not write for the piano. It didn't exist. Concerto for two violins in D minor, Das Clavier, St. Matthew Passion, and this one that you will know very, very well, I'm sure, the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. So I've used that word prelude and fugue a bit. So what in the dickens is a prelude? Simply, it's an introductory piece of music, the opening act for an opera. A fugue, what's a fugue? First movement of a suite, as in potentially a symphony. And you also, we don't call them preludes on Broadway, we call them something else, and I just forgot the word. What is a fugue? This is for you guys who can look things up. The contrapuntal composition for multiple voices. Instruments are voices. Several voices play the same melody intertwined, and maybe not at the same time, hence contrapuntal. So let's talk about the clavier, or the clavier. The clavier means a keyboard instrument, such that the Well-Tempered Clavier was not written for a specific instrument, but was written for any keyboard instrument. We know, going back in our history, that the organ was the first keyboard instrument, more or less, that we know today. It was followed by the clavichord, and these are two pictures of a clavichord made in Hamburg in 1728, and you'll see at the bottom the clavichord action. And that's simply what makes it make noise. The plucker-like thing that you can't really see in the middle that plinked the string is the tangent, of which I will likely be going off on many occasions this morning. So the clavichord, simplest of all string keyboard instruments, early 15th to 19th century, primarily in Western Europe. And it was used primarily by musicians to either learn, practice, or compose, or all three of them. It is relatively soft, quiet sounding. Andras Schiff said, "You must sit in the first room of my living room if you want to hear me play it." I'm assuming that you can actually see the screen and you can hear me because I have no clue the way I have this set up. Somebody call me at 213-718-4900 if you can't hear me or you can't see the big screen.
Charlie, we can see and hear you. You're doing very well, thank you.
Thank you very much. But the phone's ringing off the hook. The harpsichord came after the clavichord and was a very, very different shape. You saw the man playing a clavichord and the keys were right in front of you, but the strings went off to the right. This is the top photograph is a, I can't talk, is a clavichord built by the Ruckers family, which started building clavichords in the late 1500s. This one was built in Antwerp, which I think is now Belgium, and it was built roughly in 1619. The bottom one has an interesting story. Though it is not the original, it is a near perfect replica, except it has no wear. It's the harpsichord that George Washington in I did it yesterday for my piano instructor, 1793 purchased for his granddaughter. It was quite advanced for its days. If you look closely, and you may not be able to see me pointing at this too well, there we go. It had stops, which would permit the individual playing the double manual harpsichord to change the tone of the sound that came out. The most significant and most important development was this right here. And those are louvers, which permit the instrument, which normally has no loud, no soft, but steady tone to it because it's a plucker, just like the clavichord. The pianist or the harpsichordist could open and close those levers to increase the sound and to, or volume, I should say, and to soften it. The first harpsichords were made in the mid-1500s, thereabouts, by Hans Rucker in that first picture. And his offspring, Andreas Ruckers II, continued to his death to make harpsichords into the late 1600s. Now let's look at the harpsichord. Remember that it says only one, it does one tone, and that's it. Early 15th to late 18th century, it literally plucks the strings. It's a set of jacks, thin strips of wood, that hold a plectrum of quill, leather, and metal. Each has 2 or more sets of strings, each producing different tones. There's a 4-foot register, which is an octave higher, and the 8-foot register is the normal pitch. So this is a pretty big instrument. What you're seeing here is the inner workings of a harpsichord. That thing popping up is a jack, and you will see that little piece of metal. That's called a plectrum, and it's plecking or plucking the strings. There is only one volume, and that's because it only hits the string one way. You will now see that the jack is being removed, and you can see where the plectrum sits on the jack. And in this case, it's a metal plectrum more often than not, as it's being renovated. So now you turn it over and take a look at how it's held in place. Now we get to the modern piano. Oops, no, we aren't. We're at the pianoforte. If you take a look at the action, pardon me, the thing that makes the noise that we saw in that little video about the harpsichord jacks, And you compare that to what Bartolomeo Cristofori invented in 1700 or thereabouts as the new pianoforte action. Notice the little hammers here, and it's fairly rudimentary. There we go. Takes a while to get, there we go.
My name is Jason Kerdobney, and I'm the Frederick P. Rose Curator in Charge of Musical Instruments. This is the oldest piano in existence. It was made in 1720 by Bartolomeo Cristofori, who invented the instrument around 1700, but this is the earliest one that exists. Cristofori was not trying to invent a new instrument. He was trying to create a harpsichord that had more touch, sensibility. The way that he got that was by inventing a hammer mechanism. I think you can hear the gradations in volume, which is really what it's about. He called it a gravicembalo col pianoforte, which is gravicembalo keyboard that plays soft and loud. That was the innovation. That's what everything was about.
The pianoforte, 1700, Bartolomeo Cristofori, or Cristofori, I guess. It was the first hammer action keyboard. And please don't comment on the missing A in gravicembalo, col pianoforte. Changes in loudness solely by striking keys harder, which you could not do with the harpsichord or the clavichord. His action, that thing with the hammers that makes noise, was state of the art for 75 years. And today's incredibly complex action is tied to Cristofori's invention. Now, let's look at the modern piano, since you've already heard one of his early pianos played. There's the upright piano on the left, which is a vertical soundboard, that big thing in the grand piano that's 6 feet long or something like that. And on the right-hand side is a grand piano. I looked at these pianos over at Hollywood Piano, which if you've never been to it is an absolute gas. This is a Steingraber and Son model. It's a 54-inch upright, the tallest there are. And you can buy it for a mere $66,680, but I'm sure you could talk them down to $66,000. The model on the right is the Concert Grand Piano by the same maker, 8'11", and it looks like it retails for something. Notice the from, $253,920. That would be almost four Teslas, maybe. And oh, by the way, I played that thing on the left, the $66,000 one, and I plinked a few keys on the $253,000 one. And I can assure you that I played $12,000 and $13,000 uprights, and I couldn't tell any difference. Now you're going to see the grand piano action. Notice the key on the right, the hammer which is raised by the key to hit the string, and the damper is lifted at the same time to permit the making of a sound. Notice how fast you can hit the key. That's in large part because of the escapement or double escapement that you see right there in the middle. We're about to see that a little bit closer up, which will help explain more how this works. That's the escapement. It's pushing the hammer up, and then the double escapement, notice, is when that little ball being held up by that little stick thing drops over the side, and that permits the hammer to return to its resting place while the key is still depressed. In a minute, we're going to see the effect of the sustain pedal, which lifts the damper from the string when it is depressed. And what that has the effect of doing is that it permits the string to vibrate longer, producing the sound of the note after the key has been released. It's based solely on what you do with your foot, as opposed to what you do with your finger on the key. So now let's go to the Well-Tempered Clavier. Book 1 was written in the 1720s. It paired preludes and fugues in each of the 12 major and minor keys, meaning it was a total of 24 piano compositions. Book 2 was completed sometime in the mid-1740s. 1742 is given as the date. 24 preludes and fugues was what it was titled. The Well-Tempered Clavier is one of the most influential works in the history of Western classical music. And I'm guessing that you have all heard Prelude number one in C major more than once. Well-Tuned, by the way, did not specify any particular instrument keyboard instrument. The combined work, the two books, 48 pieces, are often referred to as the 48 in very reverential tones. It is one of the most important pieces of piano music that's ever been done. So now we go to the title, the Well-Tuned Clavier. This is what Bach had to say to Gottfried Silbermann. You tune the organ in the manner you please, and I play the organ in the key I please. Prior to the early to mid 1700s, each instrument was tuned separately for each key, which made it difficult to sit down at a keyboard to play compositions in different keys, or play one keyed composition followed by a composition in a different key. One of Bach's major accomplishments was the Well-Tempered Clavier, which began to set a tuning standard for playing all 12 major and 12 minor key compositions on the same keyboard. I better hurry up. Again, we're taking a closer look at the handwritten Prelude in C major by Johan S. Bach. Please do not try to play Bach's handwritten Prelude in C major score. It would be a bit difficult. This is the score that I play from. Notice I've scratched out the Well-Tempered Clavier. It was actually Clavichord in this particular arrangement. I crossed it out because it's not the Well-Tempered Clavichord, it's the Well-Tempered Clavier. Notice that there's a lot of chicken scratch on there. An early music teacher told me not to take up a new piece unless I had a sharp pencil in hand, so that I could make notes as to, if you see down here, that's a stretch that I often forget. That's an octave stretch in that arpeggio. Now, these are played one at a time, not two at a time. I mean, not all at once, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. So this would be, that is an arpeggio. We go to the next slide here. And you see that somewhere on the web, I found this thing. It's pretty interesting. This is taking the Prelude in C major, which you just saw, which is a lot of notes and looks modestly complex, and converts it to blocked chords. So this is an arpeggio, and this is a blocked chord. The reason I'm showing this to you is that though this is a complex piece, it is only composed of 15 different chords. Now, to me, that's a lot. But out of 38, you only have to learn 15 and remember where you have to play them. And oh, by the way, in my music, most music tells you what the chord is, as you will see here, but mine doesn't. So I've tried to write in what the chords are, and I'm not particularly good at that. So that is the discussion of the history of the piano. And oh, I'm sorry. I think we're out of time.